Picture waking up before dawn in the palatial chambers of the Palatine Hill, knowing that before the day ends, you'll have made decisions affecting 60 million people across 3 continents, commanded the world's most powerful military, managed an economy larger than anything humanity had ever seen, and quite possibly survived at least one assassination attempt. The year is 113 AD. And Emperor Trajan is about to begin another day that would exhaust even the most driven modern executive. Tonight, we'll follow the relentless schedule of Roman emperors whose daily routines made the crushing workload of today's Fortune 500 CEOs look like a leisurely vacation. Marcus Ulpius Trajanus stirred in his sleeping chamber as the first pale light of dawn crept through the narrow windows of the Domus Flavia. At 59, the emperor had ruled the vast Roman Empire for 15 years, and every single day had been a marathon of decisions, ceremonies, military planning, and political maneuvering that would have broken lesser men. But today would be particularly challenging. Reports had arrived overnight of trouble on the Dacian frontier. The Senate was pressing for his attention on new tax legislation. A delegation from Egypt required an audience about grain shipments, and the afternoon would bring the dedication of his latest architectural project, the massive new forum that bore his name. The imperial wake-up routine began at the 4th hour before dawn, roughly 2 a.m. by modern standards, when the emperor's personal attendants quietly entered the sleeping chamber. Unlike modern executives who might start their day with coffee and news briefings, Roman emperors faced immediate life-and-death decisions the moment consciousness returned. Night dispatches from across the empire awaited imperial review. Military reports from Britain, Germany, and the eastern frontiers, intelligence summaries from the Praetorian Guard, urgent communications from provincial governors, and the daily security briefing that detailed potential threats to the emperor's life. The morning ablutions of a Roman emperor were themselves a complex political and security operation. Personal hygiene was attended to by trusted slaves who had undergone extensive background investigations, as emperors had been poisoned through contaminated cosmetics, oils, and even bathing water. The emperor's clothing was inspected for concealed weapons or poison needles, while food tasters sampled every item that would touch the imperial lips. This paranoid attention to detail wasn't mere imperial vanity. 13 of the first 15 emperors had died violent deaths, making survival itself a full-time occupation. The security protocols surrounding the emperor's morning routine were more elaborate than those protecting modern world leaders. Each piece of clothing was examined by multiple attendants, water for washing was tested for contamination, and even the emperor's personal quarters were searched each morning for concealed assassins or poisoned objects. The imperial barber, responsible for shaving the emperor's face with razor-sharp bronze implements, underwent daily loyalty tests and was accompanied by guards who watched his every movement. A single slip of the blade, whether accidental or intentional, could prove fatal to the most powerful man in the world. The physical transformation from private citizen to public emperor required elaborate costuming and staging that anticipated modern media management by nearly 2 millennia. The imperial toga, made from the finest wool and dyed with precious murex purple, required the assistance of multiple attendants to drape properly. The emperor's appearance was carefully managed to project the appropriate image for each day's activities: military commander for army reviews, civil magistrate for legal proceedings, religious pontiff for ceremonial functions, or benevolent father figure for public appearances. But the psychological transformation was even more demanding. From the moment Trajan appeared in public, he had to embody the divine authority and superhuman capability that Romans expected from their emperors. Every gesture, every expression, every word would be scrutinized by audiences ranging from loyal citizens to potential assassins. The emotional and mental discipline required to maintain this imperial persona throughout 16-hour days, year after year, created psychological pressures that drove many emperors to madness, paranoia, or both. The imperial wardrobe itself represented a complex system of symbolic communication that modern executives rarely need to master. Different occasions required different combinations of toga styles, jewelry, and accessories that conveyed specific messages about the emperor's role and intentions. Military meetings demanded the scarlet cloak of supreme commander, judicial proceedings required the formal toga praetexta with its purple border, religious ceremonies called for special priestly vestments, and public appearances needed regalia that demonstrated imperial magnificence without appearing ostentatious to common citizens. The morning briefing that followed the emperor's preparation made modern executive meetings look like casual conversations. Intelligence reports arrived from an espionage network that spanned from Britain to Mesopotamia, providing detailed information about military movements, political developments, economic conditions, and potential security threats. The Emperor's Council included the prefect of the Praetorian Guard, the urban prefect responsible for Rome's administration, military commanders from major frontiers, and senior senators whose political support was essential for imperial stability. These morning sessions required Trajan to rapidly process information from dozens of sources, make decisions affecting millions of people, and coordinate responses across vast distances using communication systems that relied on horseback messengers and sailing ships. A single morning might include decisions about troop deployments in Germany, tax collection in Egypt, grain shipments from North Africa, judicial appeals from Spain, and construction projects in Rome itself. The cognitive load of managing such diverse and complex issues simultaneously would challenge even modern executives with instant global communications and computer-assisted analysis. The intelligence-gathering systems that supported imperial decision-making were remarkably sophisticated for their time. A network of spies, informants, and official observers provided regular reports on everything from barbarian tribal movements to grain prices in provincial markets. The emperor's personal intelligence service, known as the frumentari, operated throughout the empire using cover identities as grain dealers while actually gathering information about potential threats to imperial security. This information was compiled into daily briefings that provided the emperor with situational awareness that was extraordinary for the ancient world. The analysis and synthesis of intelligence information required emperors to develop cognitive skills that modern leaders might envy. Without computers or analytical software, emperors had to mentally process vast amounts of data, identify patterns and trends, and make strategic decisions based on their personal ability to understand complex situations. The memory skills required to retain detailed information about hundreds of different situations across the empire would have impressed even modern executives with access to sophisticated information management systems. The judicial responsibilities of Roman emperors represented one of the most demanding aspects of their daily routine. As the supreme legal authority in the empire, emperors served as the final court of appeal for major criminal cases, civil disputes, and administrative decisions from across the Roman world. Trajan typically heard between 20 and 50 cases each morning, ranging from property disputes between wealthy landowners to appeals from provincials claiming Roman citizenship, from military discipline cases to accusations of treason against senators. Each case required the emperor to quickly master complex legal details, assess the credibility of witnesses and evidence, and render decisions that would set precedents affecting future legal proceedings throughout the empire. The stakes were enormous. Wrongful executions could create political enemies, lenient sentences might encourage further crime, and biased judgments could undermine the legal system's credibility. Modern Supreme Court justices spend months deliberating on cases that Roman emperors decided in minutes, often without the luxury of extensive legal research or consultation. The legal knowledge required for imperial judicial duties was encyclopedic in scope. Roman law covered everything from property rights and commercial transactions to family relationships and criminal procedure. Emperors had to understand not only Roman civil law, but also the various legal traditions of conquered territories that continued to operate alongside imperial legislation. The ability to rapidly analyze legal arguments, identify relevant precedents, and craft decisions that would be both legally sound and politically acceptable required intellectual capabilities that few modern leaders possess. The administrative workload facing Roman emperors dwarfed anything experienced by modern government leaders. The empire included over 40 provinces, each with its own languages, customs, legal traditions, and economic systems. Emperors had to coordinate policies across this vast territory while maintaining the delicate balance between central control and local autonomy that made Roman rule acceptable to diverse populations. Daily decisions included military appointments, provincial governorships, tax rates, public works projects, religious policies, and trade regulations that affected every aspect of life for 60 million imperial subjects. The financial management responsibilities alone would have overwhelmed most modern executives. The imperial treasury collected taxes from across the known world, funded the largest military force in human history, maintained thousands of miles of roads and aqueducts, supported massive public works projects, and provided grain subsidies that fed over 200,000 residents of Rome itself. Trajan had to balance these enormous expenditures while maintaining the fiscal stability that supported Roman currency and credit throughout the Mediterranean world. The complexity of imperial finances required emperors to understand economic principles that wouldn't be formally theorized until modern times. Currency management across provinces with different monetary systems, international trade regulation, taxation policy that encouraged economic growth while generating sufficient revenue, and public spending that maintained political stability without causing inflation, all demanded sophisticated economic understanding. The emperor's financial advisors provided technical expertise, but ultimate decisions about fiscal policy rested with the emperor himself. Tax collection across the empire represented one of the most challenging aspects of imperial administration. Different provinces used different tax systems. Some paid fixed tributes, others contributed percentages of agricultural production, and still others provided military recruits in lieu of monetary payments. Emperors had to constantly adjust these systems to respond to changing economic conditions, natural disasters, military needs, and political developments. The assessment of fair tax rates required detailed knowledge of local conditions across dozens of provinces, each with its own economic circumstances and political sensitivities. The military command responsibilities of Roman emperors created pressures that modern civilian leaders rarely experience. As supreme commander of over 300,000 professional soldiers deployed across dozens of frontiers, emperors had to coordinate military operations across distances that took months to traverse. Daily military briefings included reports from Britain, where legions faced Celtic warriors, from Germany, where Roman forces watched restless Germanic tribes, from the east, where conflicts with Parthia threatened Roman interests in Asia, and from North Africa, where desert campaigns against nomadic raiders continued year-round. Military decision-making required emperors to balance competing strategic priorities with limited resources. Reinforcing one frontier might weaken another, launching offensive campaigns could leave key areas vulnerable, and military failures could trigger rebellions that threatened imperial survival. The psychological pressure of knowing that wrong decisions could lead to military disasters, massive casualties, and potential civil war created stress levels that few modern leaders ever experience. The logistical challenges of maintaining Roman military forces across such vast distances were staggering. Armies required constant supplies of food, weapons, equipment, and replacement personnel, all of which had to be transported across hostile territory using ancient transportation systems. Emperors had to coordinate supply chains that stretched across continents, manage recruitment systems that provided trained soldiers from dozens of different cultures, and maintain the industrial infrastructure that produced weapons and equipment for the world's largest military force. Strategic planning for military campaigns required emperors to think years in advance while maintaining the flexibility to respond to unexpected developments. Campaign planning involved not just military considerations, but also diplomatic negotiations with allied tribes, economic planning to fund military operations, political management to maintain domestic support for potentially costly wars, and intelligence gathering to understand enemy capabilities and intentions. The diplomatic responsibilities of Roman emperors involved managing relationships with dozens of client kings, tribal leaders, and foreign powers whose cooperation was essential for imperial security. Daily diplomatic correspondence included communications with British tribal chiefs, Germanic kings, Parthian monarchs, and local rulers throughout the Mediterranean world. Each relationship required careful management, as offended allies could become dangerous enemies, while overly generous terms might encourage others to demand similar concessions. The complexity of imperial diplomacy required emperors to understand the political dynamics of dozens of different societies, each with its own cultural values, religious beliefs, and political structures. Successful diplomacy often depended on the emperor's ability to offer incentives that appealed to foreign leaders while maintaining Roman interests and avoiding commitments that could create future problems. The emperor's diplomatic corps provided expertise and advice, but major policy decisions had to be made by the emperor himself. Trade negotiations with foreign powers required emperors to balance economic opportunities with security concerns. Roman merchants sought access to new markets and valuable commodities, but increased trade relationships could also provide intelligence opportunities for potential enemies or create dependencies that might be exploited during future conflicts. Emperors had to evaluate the risks and benefits of different trade policies while considering their implications for military security, economic prosperity, and political stability. The religious duties of Roman emperors added another layer of complexity to their already overwhelming schedules. As Pontifex Maximus, the emperor served as supreme religious authority for the empire, responsible for maintaining the proper relationship between Rome and the gods, whose favor ensured imperial success. Daily religious observances included sacrifices, prayers, and rituals that were believed essential for military victory, agricultural prosperity, and political stability. These religious responsibilities weren't merely ceremonial. Romans genuinely believed that improper religious observance could bring divine punishment in the form of military defeats, natural disasters, or political upheavals. Emperors had to memorize complex ritual procedures, maintain detailed religious calendars, and ensure that proper ceremonies were conducted throughout the empire. The psychological burden of believing that the empire's survival depended on perfect religious performance added enormous pressure to an already demanding schedule. The management of religious affairs across the empire required emperors to balance respect for local traditions with the need to maintain imperial unity. Different provinces had their own gods, festivals, and religious practices that had to be accommodated within the broader framework of Roman religion. Emperors had to decide which foreign deities could be incorporated into Roman pantheon, how to handle religious conflicts between different communities, and when to intervene in religious disputes that might threaten political stability. The emperor's role as Pontifex Maximus also involved overseeing the various priestly colleges that maintained Roman religious traditions. These included the augurs who interpreted divine signs, the haruspices who examined sacrificial animals for omens, the Vestal virgins who maintained the sacred fire, and numerous other religious officials who performed specialized functions. The coordination of these various religious institutions required constant attention to personnel appointments, ceremonial schedules, and religious law. The public appearance requirements for Roman emperors were more demanding than those facing modern celebrities or politicians. Emperors were expected to appear regularly at gladiatorial games, chariot races, theater performances, and public ceremonies, where their behavior was scrutinized by crowds that could number in the hundreds of thousands. These appearances weren't optional social events. They were essential political demonstrations that proved the emperor's health, competence, and connection to the Roman people. Each public appearance required elaborate preparation and security arrangements. Routes had to be planned and secured, crowds had to be managed and monitored for potential threats, and the emperor's behavior had to be carefully choreographed to project the appropriate image. A single misstep, inappropriate gesture, or sign of weakness could trigger rumors that might destabilize the entire empire. The psychological pressure of being constantly on display, knowing that every action was being evaluated by potential enemies, created stress levels that would have challenged even the most experienced modern public figures. The theatrical aspects of imperial appearances required emperors to develop performance skills that would have impressed professional actors. They had to project authority and confidence, even when feeling uncertain, display appropriate emotions for different occasions, and maintain dignity under circumstances that might be personally embarrassing or politically dangerous. The emperor's public persona had to remain consistent across diverse audiences and situations, requiring extraordinary self-control and emotional discipline. The interaction with crowds during public appearances required emperors to read and respond to mass psychology in ways that could mean the difference between political success and dangerous unrest. A crowd's mood could shift rapidly from adulation to hostility, and emperors had to recognize warning signs and adjust their behavior accordingly. The ability to sense crowd dynamics and respond appropriately was a survival skill that emperors developed through experience, often at considerable personal risk. The architectural and construction projects sponsored by emperors required them to function as project managers for some of the largest construction efforts in human history. Trajan's Forum, being dedicated this afternoon, represented years of planning, design, and construction management that involved thousands of workers, massive quantities of materials from across the empire, and coordination with dozens of contractors and suppliers. Emperors had to make decisions about architectural details, approve engineering plans, manage budgets, and coordinate construction schedules while simultaneously handling all their other responsibilities. The scale of imperial construction projects dwarfed anything undertaken by modern corporations or governments. The Forum of Trajan required demolishing an entire hillside, constructing massive retaining walls, importing marble from Greece and Egypt, and creating architectural spaces that could accommodate tens of thousands of people. The project management challenges involved in coordinating such efforts using ancient communication and transportation systems would have tested even modern construction executives with computer-aided design and global supply chains. The funding of imperial construction projects required sophisticated financial planning that balanced immediate costs with long-term benefits. Major projects like the Forum of Trajan cost enormous sums that had to be allocated from imperial revenues while maintaining funding for military operations, administrative expenses, and public welfare programs. Emperors had to justify these expenditures to the Senate and the Roman people while ensuring that the projects enhanced rather than undermined imperial prestige and political stability. The artistic and aesthetic decisions involved in imperial construction projects required emperors to serve as patrons and critics of the finest artists and architects of their time. The Forum of Trajan included sculptures, mosaics, paintings, and architectural details that represented the highest achievements of Roman art. Emperors had to evaluate artistic proposals, approve design changes, and ensure that the finished projects reflected imperial values and artistic excellence. As the morning progressed into the afternoon hours, Trajan's schedule became even more demanding. The dedication ceremony for his new forum required him to function simultaneously as religious celebrant, political leader, military commander, and architectural patron. Thousands of invited guests included senators, military officers, foreign dignitaries, and prominent citizens whose reactions would be carefully observed and reported throughout the empire. The emperor had to deliver speeches, conduct religious ceremonies, receive diplomatic presentations, and manage social interactions while maintaining the imperial dignity that Romans expected from their ruler. The afternoon also brought the weekly meeting of the Imperial Council, where major policy decisions were debated and formulated. Today's agenda included responses to the Dacian frontier situation, review of tax collection reports from Gaul, consideration of new judicial appointments, and planning for next year's military campaigns. Each item required the emperor to quickly master complex details, balance competing interests, and make decisions that would affect millions of people across the empire. The management of the Imperial Council required extraordinary diplomatic and leadership skills. Council members included some of the most powerful and ambitious men in the empire, each with their own political agendas and personal interests. Emperors had to guide discussions toward productive conclusions while managing competing personalities and conflicting viewpoints. The ability to build consensus among strong-willed advisors while maintaining ultimate decision-making authority required political skills that few modern executives ever need to develop. The policy development process within the Imperial Council involved analyzing complex issues that affected multiple provinces and diverse populations. A single policy decision might have different implications for urban and rural areas, for Roman citizens and provincial subjects, for military and civilian populations, and for different economic classes. Emperors had to consider all these factors while crafting policies that would be both effective and politically acceptable across the empire's diverse constituencies. The evening hours brought little relief from the relentless pace of imperial responsibilities. Private audiences with important petitioners continued until well after sunset, including meetings with wealthy merchants seeking trading privileges, provincial governors reporting on local conditions, military commanders requesting reinforcements, and senators lobbying for their political priorities. Each meeting required the emperor to rapidly shift focus, assess complex situations, and make decisions that often had far-reaching consequences. The management of these private audiences required emperors to maintain detailed knowledge about hundreds of individuals and their personal circumstances. A merchant's request for trading privileges might depend on his past reliability, political connections, and ability to provide valuable services to the empire. A provincial governor's report on local conditions had to be evaluated in light of his administrative competence, political loyalties, and potential personal motivations. The emperor's ability to make sound judgments about people and situations was crucial for effective governance. The imperial dinner, while more elaborate than modern executive meals, was itself a political and diplomatic event that required careful management. Guest lists had to be balanced to avoid offending important constituencies, seating arrangements reflected complex hierarchies of Roman society, and conversations had to be guided to avoid topics that might create political difficulties. Even the choice of food and wine carried political implications, as emperors were expected to demonstrate both imperial magnificence and appropriate Roman values. The social dynamics of imperial dinners required emperors to function as skilled hosts while simultaneously gathering information and advancing political objectives. Dinner conversations provided opportunities to assess the opinions and loyalties of important individuals, float trial balloons for potential policy changes, and build personal relationships that might prove politically valuable. The emperor's ability to manage these social interactions effectively could significantly impact his political success and survival. The security arrangements required for imperial dining would have impressed modern Secret Service details. Food was prepared by trusted slaves and tested by professional tasters, wine was sealed and guarded from vineyard to table, and guests were screened and searched for concealed weapons. The dining room itself was designed with multiple escape routes and stationed guards, while the emperor's personal physician remained on call throughout the meal in case of poisoning attempts. The menu planning for imperial dinners involved considerations that went far beyond culinary preferences. Different foods carried symbolic meanings that had to be considered, dietary restrictions of guests had to be accommodated, and the overall impression created by the meal had to support the emperor's political objectives. The cost and rarity of ingredients demonstrated imperial wealth and power, while the style of service reflected Roman cultural values and social hierarchies. The evening correspondence session that concluded each imperial day involved reviewing and responding to dozens of messages that had arrived throughout the day from across the empire. Military reports required immediate responses, provincial governors needed guidance on local issues, and diplomatic communications demanded careful consideration of their implications for imperial foreign policy. The emperor's personal secretaries, recruited from the most educated slaves and freedmen in the empire, worked alongside the emperor to manage this vast correspondence using the ancient equivalent of a global communications network. The composition of imperial correspondence required extraordinary writing skills and political sensitivity. Each message had to be crafted to achieve specific objectives while avoiding language that might create unintended consequences. Diplomatic correspondence required particular care, as misunderstood phrases or inappropriate tone could damage important relationships or even trigger conflicts. The emperor's ability to communicate effectively in writing was crucial for maintaining control over the vast imperial bureaucracy. The record-keeping systems that supported imperial administration were remarkably sophisticated for their time. Detailed files were maintained on every important individual, significant event, and policy decision that might affect future governance. The emperor's personal archive included military records, financial reports, legal precedents, diplomatic agreements, and intelligence summaries that provided the institutional memory necessary for effective long-term planning. The physical and mental exhaustion created by such demanding schedules took a severe toll on imperial health and longevity. The average lifespan of Roman emperors was significantly shorter than that of other wealthy Romans, reflecting the enormous stress and constant dangers they faced. Many emperors developed stress-related illnesses, turned to alcohol or other substances for relief, or suffered mental breakdowns under the pressure of their responsibilities. The psychological isolation experienced by Roman emperors added another dimension to their challenges. The constant threat of assassination meant that emperors could trust very few people completely, while the divine status accorded to their office created barriers between them and normal human relationships. The combination of enormous responsibility, constant danger, and social isolation created conditions that would have challenged even the most psychologically resilient individuals. The decision-making burden facing Roman emperors was complicated by the fact that information took weeks or months to travel across the empire, while decisions often had to be made immediately based on incomplete or outdated intelligence. A crisis on the Germanic frontier might not be reported in Rome until weeks after it occurred, by which time the situation could have changed dramatically. Emperors had to develop strategies for managing an empire using communication systems that operated at the speed of horses and sailing ships, rather than the instant global communications available to modern leaders. The succession planning responsibilities of Roman emperors created additional pressures that modern executives rarely face. Unlike modern democracies where leadership transitions follow established procedures, imperial succession was often violent and unpredictable. Emperors had to carefully manage potential successors, balance the interests of different political factions, and attempt to ensure stable transitions while maintaining their own security against ambitious rivals. The adoption and training of potential successors required emperors to identify individuals with the extraordinary capabilities necessary for imperial leadership, while ensuring that these same individuals didn't pose threats to the current emperor's survival. The balance between preparing competent successors and maintaining personal security was one of the most delicate and dangerous aspects of imperial politics. The cultural and linguistic diversity of the Roman Empire required emperors to function effectively across dozens of different societies, each with its own traditions, languages, and expectations of imperial behavior. A policy that worked well in Gaul might create problems in Egypt, while decisions that pleased senators in Rome might offend provincial elites in Asia Minor. Emperors had to develop sophisticated understanding of diverse cultures while maintaining the unity and coherence that held the empire together. The language skills required for effective imperial communication were extraordinary. While Latin served as the official administrative language, many important communications were conducted in Greek, which was the diplomatic and cultural language of the Eastern Empire. Many emperors also needed to understand other languages to communicate effectively with tribal leaders, foreign diplomats, and provincial populations who didn't speak Latin or Greek fluently. The economic management responsibilities of Roman emperors involved coordinating trade, taxation, and monetary policy across an economy that spanned 3 continents and included everything from British tin mines to Chinese silk imports. Daily decisions affected exchange rates, commodity prices, and trade relationships that influenced the prosperity of millions of people. The economic knowledge required to manage such a complex system would have challenged even modern economists with sophisticated analytical tools and global databases. The regulation of commerce across the empire required emperors to balance the interests of producers, merchants, and consumers, while maintaining the stability necessary for long-term economic growth. Trade disputes between different provinces had to be resolved, standards for weights and measures had to be maintained, and currency policies had to support both local economies and empire-wide commerce. As night finally fell over Rome on this exhausting day, Emperor Trajan retired to his private chambers, knowing that tomorrow would bring another similarly demanding schedule. The reports from Dacia would require detailed military planning, the Senate would press for decisions on pending legislation, provincial governors would seek guidance on local issues, and the endless stream of petitioners, diplomats, and officials would continue to demand imperial attention. The sleeping arrangements for Roman emperors reflected the constant security concerns that dominated their lives. Guards were stationed outside the imperial bedchamber, trusted slaves slept nearby to respond to emergencies, and multiple escape routes were maintained in case of nighttime attacks. Even in sleep, emperors couldn't completely escape the pressures and dangers of their office, as dreams were often filled with anxieties about military defeats, political conspiracies, and the enormous responsibilities that awaited them each morning. The personal cost of imperial power was reflected in the private moments when emperors could briefly set aside their public personas and confront the human cost of their extraordinary responsibilities. The isolation, stress, and constant danger created psychological burdens that few individuals could bear indefinitely. Many emperors sought relief through various forms of escapism, but the demands of their office made sustained recovery nearly impossible. The comparison between Roman imperial schedules and modern executive routines reveals the extraordinary demands that ancient leaders faced in managing complex organizations with primitive communication and transportation systems. While modern CEOs may work long hours and face significant stress, they operate with technological advantages that make their jobs far more manageable than those of Roman emperors. Computer systems can process vast amounts of information instantly. Global communications allow real-time coordination across continents, and modern transportation systems make it possible to personally manage far-flung operations. Roman emperors achieved remarkable success in governing their vast empire, despite lacking any of these technological advantages. Their success depended entirely on human capabilities, intelligence, memory, judgment, stamina, and the ability to inspire loyalty and respect among subordinates who might be separated by thousands of miles and months of travel time. The cognitive and physical demands they faced would have overwhelmed most modern executives, even with all the technological assistance available today. The legacy of Roman imperial administration influenced governmental systems throughout European history and continues to affect modern institutions. The administrative techniques, legal principles, and organizational structures developed by Roman emperors provided models that were adapted by medieval kingdoms, early modern states, and even contemporary governments. The ability of Roman emperors to maintain effective control over such vast territories for so many centuries demonstrates the effectiveness of their demanding but successful approach to executive leadership. The institutional innovations developed by Roman emperors included the creation of professional civil services, standardized legal codes, systematic record-keeping procedures, and coordinated communication networks that enabled effective governance across unprecedented distances and cultural diversity. These innovations were achieved through human ingenuity and organizational skill rather than technological advantages, demonstrating the extraordinary capabilities that can be developed when necessity demands maximum human performance. As we drift toward sleep tonight, imagine the weight of decisions affecting 60 million people resting on your shoulders each morning, the constant awareness that a single mistake could trigger military disasters or political upheavals, and the relentless pace of a schedule that left no room for personal relaxation or private reflection. Consider whether you would have the physical stamina, mental acuity, and emotional resilience necessary to maintain such a demanding routine year after year, knowing that failure might mean not just personal disgrace, but the collapse of the greatest civilization the world had ever known. The marble halls of the imperial palace grow quiet as the emperor finally seeks rest, but even in sleep the enormous responsibilities continue to weigh upon him. Tomorrow will bring new crises, new decisions, and new challenges that will test every aspect of his capabilities. The routine that seemed impossible to maintain will begin again before dawn, as it did every day for those remarkable individuals who bore the title of Roman Emperor and the crushing burden of ruling the ancient world. The oil lamps burn low in the imperial study as the last dispatches are reviewed and filed away, but already new messages are beginning to arrive from distant provinces where dawn has already broken and new challenges are emerging. The empire never sleeps, and neither, truly, can those who bear the responsibility for guiding its destiny through the endless complexities of governing the ancient world's greatest civilization. In the quiet darkness of the imperial bedchamber, as Trajan finally allows exhaustion to claim him, the weight of empire continues to press upon his dreams. Tomorrow's challenges are already taking shape in distant provinces. New crises are developing that will demand immediate attention, and the relentless cycle of imperial responsibility will begin anew with the first light of dawn. The price of ruling the world, it seems, is never truly being able to rest, even in the supposed sanctuary of sleep, where the anxieties and burdens of absolute power follow emperors into their dreams and beyond.